as I sit here with this microphone, looking at my laptop computer, looking at my smartphone, I thought it would only be appropriate for this week's top 5 that I look at things that used to be big that I never thought would go away. Top 5 obsolete technology of my lifetime. So we're looking back the last, well, unfortunately now over 40 years. Where does the time go? But I'm going to look at things that I remember from all my years that used to be big and now they're gone and I never thought they would be. So let's dive in with some honorable mentions to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Honorable mentions, obsolete technology of my lifetime include floppy disks, actual print encyclopedias, dial-up internet, which we all remember, overhead projectors, which were the ones where the teacher would put like a clear sheet on there. They would do work on the sheet and you could see it on the pull-down screen. And library card catalogs. Who remembers learning the Dewey Decimal System? We don't even need that anymore. But those things are all honorable mentions for obsolete technology of my lifetime. And remember, as I always say, these are in no particular order, so let's dive into the actual top 5. Number 1 is the VCR and VHS tapes. Back in the 1980s and into most of the 1990s, there was nothing cooler than sticking a black rectangular tape into these VCRs and hitting record and having your favorite show there available for you. It seemed so high-tech. I think I still have a box in my mother's basement of all these WWF wrestling pay-per-views that I recorded on VHS tapes that are now, they're obsolete. And I have 30-something VHS tapes of things I recorded with my camcorder when I was in high school and wanted to be a film director. Luckily, today, there's software that you can hook into your laptop. You hook it up to a VCR into your laptop. It's called Elgato is the company if you're interested. But you can digitize your VHS tapes, and I've been doing that, and it's actually fun to relive the nostalgia. But DVDs came along and kind of kicked VHS to the curb in the late 1990s. Number 2, rotary phones / landline phones in general. I can remember growing up having phones that were just in the living room and plugged into the wall and having a cord from the phone to the actual main apparatus. And people had rotary phones. You had to stick your finger in the number and spin it and actually dial the phone like that. If people had multiple zeros and nines in their number, it seemed to take forever just to make the call. And then if they weren't there, it was like you wasted all that time. Good luck trying to have privacy, too, when you're on the phone. If you've got siblings like I do, trying to talk on a corded phone and hiding around the corner of the wall, trying to speak quietly. Once you got a cordless phone, it was like the greatest thing ever, but you were still stuck to a certain distance from the actual main apparatus of the telephone. I'm sure some people still have landlines just because it's habit, but they're really a dying breed. Much like phone booths that used to be everywhere, they're fading away still. But as far as rotary phones are long gone, and landline phones are likely going to be gone within the next 10 years or so, replaced by smartphones that everyone can just have in their pocket. Number 3, audio cassettes / Walkmen. Boy, I did an episode way back at the beginning of the podcast, episode 2, where I talked about the fun of making mixtapes. And it's interesting now that I have, just like with the VHS tapes, I've got a box of old cassette tapes. I've got nowhere to play them. Cassettes were fun. Singles were fun when you buy just the one song. But you'd always have trouble where the tape could get stuck in the radio. And you'd have to use the pencil to pull the tape back in. The tape could snap. And it wasn't like cassettes were cheap. Like later on when they became near the end and they were in the bins at the front of stores for like $1. They were more expensive back then. You're talking $15, $16 for a cassette tape. The only thing better than making a mixtape for someone was making your own mixtape and then playing it in your Sony Walkman and being able to go outside and have your music with you in your pocket. I just remember the batteries wouldn't last too long in a Walkman. They would die pretty quick. And usually the headphones that you had with it were really cheap with this flimsy fabric over the ear parts. And it was just uncomfortable and the sound would be tinny. But back in the 80s, that was the coolest thing ever because you were outside with your music privately for you. And the Walkman got replaced by the Discman later when compact discs became big. And those were just as troublesome because you had to get the anti-skip ones. Because if you bumped the thing, it would immediately skip. So then you had to pay extra for that. Number 4 is photo film. So in the days now where you got digital cameras and cameras on your phone and that instant gratification where you click the photo and you can see if it looks good and you can immediately take a new one if you have to. A lot of you aren't going to appreciate what it was like to have to actually open the back of a camera, stick the film in, wind it in properly, but just enough that you didn't start exposing the film, and then taking the photos, not knowing if they were any good, bringing them to a place to get them developed. It could have been CVS, it could have been Walgreens, it could have been Photomat. I'll do a segment on a Photomat later on in the podcast. But then going through all that effort and getting your photos back and having half of them be crap and just being so frustrated. In high school, I learned all about photography with the film and learning how to develop it in the dark room. And that's another thing. It's all obsolete. You don't need to know it. It's more a small niche where, yeah, there's photo film still, but oh my God, it's got to be like 1% compared to 100%. And don't get me started on the disposable cameras that they had back then. Same thing. You take the pictures, you have to wind it to get to the next part of the film and then drop the whole camera off. And then the same thing, you get the photos back and half of them will be garbage and you just want to rip them up and smash the camera. And finally, number 5 is physical maps. So again, this goes back to everyone has GPS. Everyone has Google Maps or some sort of a map application on their phone where there's no need to actually know directions on where to go. You type in an address and the voice tells you where to turn, where to go. And if you miss your turn, it recalculates and gets you there regardless. Back in the day, 80s, 90s, even through the early to mid 2000s, you had to have an actual physical map, a big folded cumbersome map that you had to have someone navigate in the passenger seat to get you where you had to be. Even me, when I did my very first travel trips, as far as my travel blog and such, back in late 2009, 2010, I didn't have a GPS, and I did actual physical map directions, and it was such a disaster that I went and spent the money on a GPS, a Garmin. When it comes to having a GPS and the Google Maps, I'm definitely not going to be the old man yells at cloud where I wish we still had physical maps and landline rotary phones and dial-up internet and all this stuff. No. I appreciate all the technology that we have now because I lived through the technology we had then. I think that's what really makes a difference. Do you remember any of those things from this top 5? The obsolete technology, did you live with any of that? Let me know if there's any I missed, too.